Jasmine Crockett just shook. Late night TV with one line. Seth Meyers wasn't ready. It was supposed to be another throwaway late night segment. A few laughs, a few jabs, maybe a clever plug for a housing bill no one in the room had actually read. Seth Meyers had done this dance 1,000 times, but what happened that Tuesday night in Studio 8G didn't follow the script. And by the time it was over, no one, not even Seth, could pretend the air hadn't changed. You could hear it in the silence. Not the kind that follows a failed joke, not the awkward beat after a punchline falls flat, for this was something different. This was the kind of silence that follows truth. Truth spoken so plainly, so cleanly, that no one dares respond too quickly, afraid they'll break the spell or worse. Reveal their own discomfort. That silence started the moment Jasmine Crockett looked Seth Meyers in the eye and said, "Chaos is usually what happens when people with means decide what poor people deserve without ever having to live with those decisions themselves." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't part of a performance. It was calm, unblinking, razor sharp. Let's rewind. The night began like any other. Seth walked out from behind the curtain to a wave of applause. The opening monologue, typical mix of Trump jokes, Congress gaffes, and climate change one-liners. Safe, expected. The audience laughed on cue, cheered at the right moments. Everything was running smooth. Sure, predictable. Then came the intro. And now, Seth announced, "Please welcome Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett." Cue the band, cue applause. She walked out like she'd done it before, not stiff, not over-smiling, just present, confident. Dressed in a deep sapphire blue suit, hair swept into a neat twist, she looked like clarity in motion. The handshake was quick, the greeting cordial. Seth opened with Texas jokes. Jasmine volleyed back, poking fun at DC heat and hot takes with zero substance. Everyone laughed. Light banter back and forth. All good. Then Seth reached for the cue card. That's when the mood shifted. "So let's talk about this bill you're backing," he said, holding up a printed headline like a prop. The one folks are calling everything from brave to borderline delusional. Polite chuckles from the audience. Seth grinned like a man who knew he was poking, but expected to land safely. He leaned in. "Look, I get it," he said. "Change is messy. But encouraging low-income housing in suburban neighborhoods without any kind of stability clause. That's a bold move." He said bold like it was a warning, wrapped in a compliment. Like he was giving her a chance to walk it back without making a scene. Jasmine didn't blink. She leaned back, folded her hands, and looked out into the crowd. A few people chuckled, still unsure if this was a joke or the beginning of something real. Then she turned to Seth. "You really want to go there?" she asked softly. He laughed, nervously. "I mean, we're here, right?" He was expecting a dodge, a pre-cooked talking point. Something about opportunity zones or mixed income development. What he got instead was silence. Jasmine didn't respond immediately. She let the moment breathe, let the air settle. She waited just long enough to make the room feel it really feel it. That's when the audience began to shift. Some leaned forward. Others looked around, suddenly unsure whether this was still funny. And then she spoke. "Well, Seth," she said, "chaos is usually what happens when people with means decide what poor people deserve without ever having to live with those decisions themselves." The laughter stopped. Seth straightened up in his chair. "You're saying..." He started fumbling for footing. "You're saying I'm out of touch, I'm saying." Jasmine replied, her voice steady. "There's a difference between telling jokes about policy and living with the consequences of it when that policy doesn't go far enough." She wasn't being defensive. She wasn't raising her voice. She was unmasking a truth so old, so embedded in American discourse, that most people don't even hear it anymore. But now, in that studio, everyone heard it. Seth tried to recover. Okay, he chuckled. But let me just push this a bit further. Isn't there a risk without clear safeguards that communities could fall into disarray? I mean, no guardrails. That's risky, right? That was the setup. And Jasmine, she didn't flinch. She tilted her head slightly, calm, unmoved. Well, Seth, she said, I see chaos when a mother works 2 jobs, lives in her car, and showers at a gym so her son doesn't find out they're homeless. That's the chaos I'm trying to address. No applause, just stillness. Even the band stopped moving. Seth opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked down at his notes like they might offer an exit. They didn't. You get to take this suit off, Jasmine continued. Walk outside, and your life stays exactly the same. I walk outside, and someone's waiting to call me. Loud, ungrateful, or dangerous, just for being clear and black at the same time. She wasn't angry. She was precise. And that was what made it land so hard. The audience wasn't sure what to do. Clap sit in it. Break the tension. They did nothing. For a full second, maybe 2. The entire room froze. Then came a single voice from the back. Damn. Soft, respectful, awed. Seth looked at Jasmine, blinking. No smirk. No comeback. You're good at this, he said finally. Jasmine didn't smile. I'm not trying to be good at it, she said. I'm trying to tell the truth, even when it's not cute enough for prime time. And just like that, the illusion shattered. This wasn't late night fluff. This was a political reality check broadcast, live in the middle of canned laughter and ad breaks. And the country, it hadn't even started reacting yet. The illusion was shattered, but the moment was only just beginning to reverberate. Because when Jasmine Crockett said, I'm not trying to be good at it, I'm trying to tell the truth. Even when it's not cute enough for prime time, she wasn't just answering a question. She was flipping the table. Seth Meyers blinked like he'd heard something unfamiliar on his own set. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a monologue. But it was disruptive in the purest, most honest way. And the crowd. They didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They absorbed. The silence was no longer awkward. It was sacred. It was the sound of realization. Seth leaned back in his chair, clearly recalibrating. For years, he had built a space where satire could graze against politics without drawing too much blood. Where the serious parts of the show were still designed to entertain. But Jasmine didn't come to entertain. She came to interrupt. The next few minutes on air weren't scripted for confrontation, but Jasmine didn't need permission to keep going. You invited me here to talk policy, right? She asked, her voice now slow and steady, like someone putting puzzle pieces into place one by one. Seth nodded, unsure of where it was headed. Sure, he said. But I thought it would be, conversational. I am being conversational, Jasmine replied. I'm just not here to make hard things easy to swallow. And there it was again, that invisible wall breaking. The audience had tuned in for light political banter and jokes between segments. What they were getting was a woman refusing to shrink truth into sound bites. That's when it happened. She turned to the audience, not the camera, not Seth, but the people in the room. You could hear the shift in her breath. How many of y'all, she asked, have ever missed a rent payment and wondered how you were going to explain that to your kid? No one answered, but the silence answered for them. Because Jasmine wasn't speaking in hypotheticals. She wasn't referencing case studies or polling data. She was channeling lived experience, her own, and the people she serves. See, she continued, when I bring forward a housing bill, I'm not thinking about approval ratings. I'm thinking about a mom I met in Fort Worth who lives in her car. She works 2 jobs. She showers at the gym. You know why? So her son doesn't know. They don't have a home. A woman in the 3rd row clutched her hands to her chest. A man near the aisle leaned forward, brow furrowed, eyes glistening. And when people tell me that housing poor folks in their neighborhoods is too chaotic, Jasmine went on, what they're really saying is poor people are the problem. Not poverty, not policy, people. There were no cheers, not yet. The audience was still metabolizing it. Seth, to his credit, didn't interrupt. He couldn't. He was no longer guiding the segment. Jasmine had taken the wheel. Well, he said, eventually swallowing hard, that wasn't the punchline I was expecting. Jasmine didn't flinch. Maybe that's the problem, she said. The audience didn't erupt, but they shifted. Not physically, but emotionally. The tension wasn't fear or discomfort, it was reflection. And for once in a political conversation, nobody wanted to move on too quickly. What happened next was subtle. No dramatic lighting cue, no dramatic orchestral build, just the power of presence. Because the conversation was no longer between a late-night host and a congresswoman, it was between a country and its conscience. You know, Seth, Jasmine said, voice lowering slightly. You get to walk out of here, and your life stays intact. Your job, your zip code, your assumptions, but me. When I speak plainly, I'm called angry. When I don't smile, I'm dangerous. And when I do smile, people say I'm calculating. There's no way to win unless I stop playing by their rules. There it was. The thesis behind the moment. She wasn't auditioning for approval. She was dismantling the framework of acceptability. Seth scratched the back of his neck. Do you think the way you talk, he asked cautiously, makes it harder for people to hear you? Jasmine smiled. Not kind. Not cruel. Just clean. Are you asking if I should soften the truth to protect other people's comfort? She asked. Seth nodded. I'm asking if volume ever drowns out the message. Jasmine didn't pause this time. No, she said. What drowns out the message is when people stop listening the second they feel uncomfortable. That line was a door closing, but it was also an invitation. Because what Jasmine was offering wasn't confrontation, it was clarity. And clarity, when you're used to noise and distraction, feels abrasive. The audience finally responded, not with laughter or claps, but with nods. Audible, visible agreement. People mouthing yes to themselves. People seeing themselves in her. Jasmine turned back to them. You all came here tonight expecting jokes. That's fair. But let me ask you, how many times have you been in a room where the joke was at your expense and you still had to laugh because it was easier than being the one who ruined the vibe? A wave of recognition swept through the studio. It wasn't subtle. It was real. People weren't just watching a political conversation anymore. They were feeling one. Jasmine let it settle before adding, people keep telling me to be more palatable, but I'm not running to be liked at dinner parties. I'm fighting for people who don't even get invited to the damn table. That cracked the dam. The clapping started slow, but with rhythm. Someone in the front row stood, then someone else, then more. It wasn't orchestrated. It was earned. And Seth? He sat still. Not threatened, not defensive, just changed. I didn't expect you to come in here and light the place up, he said, half smiling. I didn't come to light it up, Jasmine replied. I came to stop pretending the house isn't on fire. Cut to black. But the conversation, it was only just beginning. She came to stop pretending the house wasn't on fire, and everyone in the room finally smelled the smoke. Even as the applause faded, as the stage lights dimmed ever so slightly for the next segment, the air in Studio 8G stayed heavy. You could feel it clinging to the edges of every breath, every glance. This wasn't just a memorable interview, it was a rupture. Backstage, producers exchanged tense smiles. Camera operators checked their feeds like they were handling live wires. No one said it out loud, but they all knew the show had veered off script, and no one was entirely sure how to land it. But the most striking shift wasn't on camera. It was in Seth Meyers himself. As Jasmine's words echoed, I came to stop pretending the house isn't on fire. Seth looked less like a late-night host and more like someone who just realized his living room was built inside that very house. His cue card sat limp on the desk. The next guest, a comedian plugging a Netflix special, waited in the wings with visible confusion, watching monitors with wide eyes. Seth blinked slowly and said, "Let me ask you something, and I mean this honestly. What do people get most wrong about you?" Jasmine didn't jump at the question. She inhaled long and measured. Then she folded her hands in her lap, looked out over the audience once more, and lowered her voice. "They think I'm angry." The words were simple. Not self-pitying, not defensive, just a fact. They think I wake up every day ready to fight, that I'm looking for someone to argue with, to drag, to call out. But the truth is, she paused, looked at her hands. I wake up tired. A quiet mm-hmm rolled through the audience, someone somewhere deeply familiar with that exhaustion. I wake up knowing I'll have to explain something 5 different ways to 5 different people, she continued. I'll have to be clear, but not too sharp. Direct, but not too blunt. Passionate, but never too much. And then at the end of all that, I'll still be called angry. Seth didn't reach for a joke. He didn't pivot to a sponsor break. He listened. But here's what people don't see, Jasmine said. I also wake up carrying stories. A teacher in Lubbock who spent her summer waitressing because her salary couldn't cover rent. A grandmother in Baton Rouge raising 3 grandkids because her daughter was locked out of housing after one bad year. A disabled veteran in Shreveport who couldn't get his meds because the VA's online portal crashed again. The room was still. They live in my head, she said, not as data points, as people. So when I speak plainly on national television, it's not to win an argument. It's to make space for them, because nobody else is. She wasn't crying. She wasn't trembling. But every word she spoke carried a weight measured not in emotion, but in repetition. She had said these things before, to committees, to town halls, to empty chambers where cameras weren't even rolling. But, here tonight, she wasn't being ignored. She was being heard. Seth cleared his throat. That's fair, he said quietly. I think sometimes in this space, in comedy, we like to touch serious things, but not hold them. You made us hold it. He looked humbled, not humiliated, and Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't twist the knife. She smiled. Soft. Steady. And did it break you? She asked. No, Seth replied. It made me think about who I've been too comfortable laughing with instead of listening to. That line lingered not just for Seth, but for everyone in the room. The laughter that had once seemed so natural suddenly felt cheap in retrospect, like a reflex masking discomfort rather than relieving it. Jasmine leaned forward, slightly elbows on her knees. You know what would change everything, she asked, if people stopped being more afraid of being called out than they are of being complicit. It wasn't a threat. It was an observation. An open door. There was no applause, no gasps, just the weight of a truth that refused to be softened. Seth scratched the back of his neck. So, what now? What do people like me do after the camera stopped rolling? The question hung in the air, honest and exposed. Jasmine didn't hesitate. You listen differently, she said. You use your platform without needing to center yourself. You talk to people who challenge you. And you sit in the parts that feel uncomfortable without sprinting back to the punchline. That answer wasn't a reprimand, it was a map. And as she turned back toward the camera, she didn't blink. Didn't flinch. Because if we don't change the way we talk, she said, we'll never change the way we live. Cut to black. But in homes across America, the conversation was far from over. Within minutes, clips of the exchange were everywhere. Uploaded from the audience shaky phone footage with imperfect angles, but raw intensity. The moment Seth said, that wasn't the punchline I expected. The moment Jasmine fired back, Maybe that's the problem. The moment she asked how many of y'all have ever missed rent and had to explain that to your kid. On X, formerly Twitter, the 45-second video hit 100,000 views before Jasmine made it to her dressing room. By midnight, TikTok was flooded with reaction videos, Stitch's captions like she said what needed to be said. One creator wrote, "She didn't yell, she didn't shade, she told the truth, and the room shifted." But not everyone was clapping. Right-wing commentators pounced. One Fox segment called her combative 6 times in 3 minutes. Others spliced the video, removing Seth's sarcasm to frame Jasmine's responses as hostile. Headlines emerged: "Is Congresswoman Crockett too radical for prime time when wokeness meets late night?" But their edits couldn't erase the impact. They couldn't drown out the sound of a room going still in the face of clarity. And, while the internet battled over tone and optics, something quieter, more enduring, was happening. People were watching the full clip. Not just the outbursts, the pauses, the steady rhythm of conviction. In a break room in Sacramento, a janitor forwarded it to his nephew with the note, "Watch her." That's how you hold your ground. In a classroom in Atlanta, a 9th grader told her teacher, "That's how I want to sound when I speak up." In hundreds of kitchens and cars and commutes, people were seeing themselves maybe for the first time in someone who didn't twist herself into likability just to be heard. Jasmine didn't flinch. And because she didn't, others didn't have to either. Back in the studio after the taping had wrapped, Seth stood silently near the dressing rooms. He hadn't gone to his office, hadn't pulled out his phone. He just stood there. He turned to a nearby crew member. "She's still here." "Yeah," the guy replied. "Green room?" "Quiet." Seth nodded more to himself than anyone else. It wasn't obligation pulling him toward that door. It was something closer to responsibility. And what happened when he walked through it would turn a late-night interview into something even bigger than a viral moment. It would become a mirror held up to a nation daring it to look. He stood at the door for a beat too long, not because he didn't know what to say, but because for the first time in a long time, Seth Meyers understood he wasn't walking into a room as the most powerful person in it. Not anymore. It wasn't about celebrity or reach or network prestige. It was about gravity. And Jasmine Crockett carried it with her like a second skin. He knocked once. "Come in," came Jasmine's voice, calm like always. He stepped inside. The green room was dim quiet, stripped of stage polish. Jasmine was seated sipping water from a paper cup, her aide seated silently beside her. No post-interview celebration. No media buzz. Just stillness. Her aide stood politely and slipped out, leaving the two of them alone. Seth stayed standing for a moment, then gestured to the empty seat across from her. "Mind if I sit?" Jasmine looked up. "It's your studio." But the tone wasn't snide. It was neutral. Controlled. He sat, hands clasped between his knees. "That got heavier than I expected," he said, eyes down. Jasmine gave a small nod. "That tends to happen when you tell the truth." There was no accusation in her voice, just a fact. Like gravity. Seth sighed. "Look, I didn't bring you on to make fun of you. I mean, yeah, I make jokes. That's my job. But I didn't think I was crossing a line." Jasmine studied him for a moment, then said simply, "You didn't cross a line. You just didn't see the line existed." He froze. That line landed with the kind of precision you don't recover from with a joke. Because it wasn't about malice. It was about blindness. About a stage built so comfortably that its owners forgot how easily it could shrink others. He rubbed his face, trying to process. "I thought I was more aware than that." "You probably are," Jasmine said, "but awareness isn't a one-time achievement. It's a constant adjustment. Like vision. Sometimes you don't realize how blurry things were until someone hands you a clearer lens." She wasn't preaching. She wasn't angling for a soundbite. This was private. Honest. Two professionals occupying a space that rarely invites truth this bare. I don't hate you, Seth, she added. He looked up surprised. This isn't personal, she continued. This is just what it looks like when someone doesn't flinch. That line cut through the walls of the room. No metaphor, no garnish. Just a message wrapped in decades of restraint and fire. You weren't angry, Seth said more to himself than her. Nope. But you were intense, because the stakes are. Seth nodded slowly, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then he stood. Thanks for not walking out. Jasmine chuckled once dry. I wasn't going to give the internet that clip. They both smiled. It was the first mutual laugh since the segment ended. Besides, she added, you needed to hear it. They needed to hear it. Seth paused at the door. If you ever come back, I will. I'll listen better. Good, Jasmine said, because next time we're talking about healthcare. And I promise you, it'll be even messier. He left with a half smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and Jasmine exhaled the breath she'd been holding since the first headline was read on air. But outside that green room, the world was no longer where she left it. While she was sipping water in a quiet corner of NBC headquarters, the internet was catching fire. The Wi-Fi in Studio HD hadn't even reset before clips started uploading grainy real raw. No editing, no production polish. Just a congresswoman sitting in silence, then slicing through platitudes like a scalpel. It started on X. A college student from row 5 posted, she said it with her whole chest, with a clip of Jasmine saying, I'm not trying to be good at it. I'm trying to tell the truth. 100,000 views in under an hour. Then a TikTok edit added a caption over Jasmine's deadpan stare. When you've had to code switch your whole life, but tonight, you don't. By sunrise, it was viral across 5 platforms. The headlines were next. Crockett's Stone Cold Truth Shakes Late Night Too Raw for primetime, or exactly what we needed, mic drop or misstep viewers. Divided after Crockett interview. Left-leaning commentators praised her clarity. Activists hailed her refusal to soften her tone. Right-leaning outlets called it a calculated ambush. One Fox anchor used the word combative 6 times in 3 minutes. But the backlash was shallow compared to the resonance, because something deeper had cracked open. People weren't just reacting, they were revisiting. Watching the full clip. Listening to the pauses, the control, the decision not to perform. In a 2-bedroom apartment in Flagstaff, a single mother played the clip for her teenage daughter and said, "That's how you speak truth without yelling." In a Sacramento break room, a janitor forwarded it to his nephew with the words, "You see her. She's the real deal." Even within Seth's own orbit, the shockwaves landed. Writers, producers, old friends. They started texting. That wasn't your best look? You gonna say something or nah? She handled that better than most would have. But Seth didn't respond. He wasn't dodging. He was sitting with it. And that was new. The segment didn't just trend. It rippled through classrooms, city councils, nonprofit boards, through group chats and office Slack threads, and school teachers' inboxes. Not because it was flashy, but because it said something everyone else had been avoiding. And Jasmine. She didn't say a word online. No quote tweets. No IG story. Just one statement typed plainly and posted at 6 a.m. From her official account, I said what I meant. And I meant what I said. If that's too much, the problem isn't me. No hashtags, no emojis. That was it. The trolls came. Of course they did. They always do. But so did the thinkers, the sharers, the young organizers, the 12th grade civics teachers, assigning the clip as required viewing. This wasn't just a viral moment anymore. This was a mirror. Because when Jasmine said, "You don't owe the world politeness when your people are hurting. You owe them courage and clarity." It wasn't a slogan. It was a permission slip. To stop diluting the message. to stop apologizing for existing fully, to stop explaining injustice in a way that's easy for power to digest, and in homes across America, especially in the ones where policy hits first and hardest, that message didn't just land. It stayed. Long after the likes plateaued and the headlines moved on, Jasmine Crockett's words clung to places where applause rarely echoes: break rooms, classrooms, kitchen counters stacked with bills. Where truth isn't debated, it's lived. Because when someone like Jasmine speaks and refuses to coat her message in sugar, what she's really doing is handing people a mirror. Not the kind that flatters, the kind that shows what's been there all along unspoken. You don't owe the world politeness when your people are hurting. You owe them courage and clarity. That wasn't just a mic drop line. That was gospel. And in the week after the segment, it became something else, a reference point. In a library in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, it echoed again, spoken not from a stage or a podium, but from the folding chair of a woman named Angela, dressed in nursing scrubs. I watched the thing Angela said, lifting her hand in a casual gesture, like swatting away the gravity of what she was about to say. You and Seth watched it more than once. Jasmine, seated at the front of the room, offered a modest smile. Was it too much? Angela shook her head slowly. No, baby. It was the first time I've seen someone on TV say what we say in break rooms all the time. You didn't flinch. You didn't dress it up. You just said it plain. And we needed that. That line. We needed that landed heavier than any viral tweet ever could. Because that library wasn't full of pundits or Twitter users dissecting tone. It was full of everyday people. Teachers, retirees, single moms, high school kids with notebooks in their laps. People who didn't need the message to go viral to feel it. And Jasmine knew it. That's why she was there. No press, no entourage. Just a small round table with lukewarm coffee store brand cookies and a whiteboard someone had half-heartedly written community housing discussion on with a dying expo marker. Jasmine wasn't trying to recapture a viral moment. She was trying to extend it, make it tangible. She wasn't there for a soundbite. She was there for a conversation. Because that's what the moment on Seth's show had truly been. Not an outburst, not a performance, but a refusal. A refusal to soften the truth. A refusal to bend around someone else's comfort. A refusal to be palatable when people are dying under policies disguised as politeness. And now, people were showing up not to cheer, but to participate. Across the country, watch parties were organized not for sports or award shows, but for a clip from a late-night interview. Book clubs used it to frame conversations about race and rhetoric. A teacher in Philadelphia used it as a writing prompt. Write the sentence you've been too afraid to say aloud in a room full of people who don't know what it cost you. This wasn't celebrity. It was currency. Authenticity traded in real-world relevance. Still, the backlash came. It always does. Conservative commentators amplified a heavily edited version of the interview, removing Seth's jabs and keeping only Jasmine's firmest responses. They framed it as a leftist ambush, called her another angry radical, and spun the whole thing as proof that late night had gone full woke. One network anchor smirked as she asked her panel, "Is this really the tone we want from elected officials? Shouldn't they be unifying?" And it was that word unifying that made Jasmine sit back in her office, close her laptop, and say aloud to no one, "Unifying for who?" Because Jasmine knew the game. She'd seen it play out 1,000 times. The world doesn't really want unity. It wants quiet. It wants order. It wants the illusion of fairness, without the discomfort of confronting what created the imbalance in the first place. So, when Jasmine was invited to do a follow-up interview via Zoom with a local station in Tulsa, she agreed, but made one request: no clips, no edits. Air it in full. Delia Rosario, a veteran reporter, known more for clarity than clicks, opened the interview with a disarming question. What was really going through your mind in that chair? Jasmine didn't skip a beat. I was tired, she said. Tired of having to sound grateful just to speak. Tired of acting like the only way to be taken seriously is to shrink myself. Delia nodded silent. I didn't go there to make a scene, Jasmine continued. I just refused to let someone put a smiley face over something serious, and that apparently was enough to shock people. The clip didn't go viral immediately, but it began to circulate quietly and powerfully among the people who had felt that same exhaustion. Nurses on overnight shifts, bus drivers on break, high school teachers between grading papers. People started using Jasmine's words as armor. One woman in Kansas tweeted, I used to rehearse how to talk in meetings so I wouldn't be too sharp. Not anymore. Jasmine gave us a blueprint. And that was the thing, Jasmine hadn't dropped a manifesto. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't even raised her voice. She'd done something much harder. She'd stayed still in the middle of discomfort. And she'd told the truth plainly. That plainness became her signature. It wasn't about being combative. It was about not apologizing for clarity. In a follow-up town hall in Dallas, someone asked, do you ever worry that being so direct might cost you political capital? Jasmine answered, without hesitation, I'm not here to be agreeable. I'm here to be honest. Because I don't work for applause, I work for people. That quote went viral again. But this time, no one was surprised. Because the country had shifted. Not everywhere, not all at once, but enough. In a classroom in St. Paul, a ninth grade girl raised her hand and asked her teacher, can I write my final paper on how women like Jasmine Crockett are changing the way we're allowed to speak? That moment, one teacher. One girl? One raised hand said more than 1 million likes ever could? And still, Jasmine moved quietly. She didn't tweet victory laps. She didn't do a press tour. She kept showing up committee hearings, town halls, policy briefings, because for her, the real impact of the moment wasn't the viral clip. It was the wake, the conversations, the questions, the new permissions people were giving themselves to speak plainly, to stop softening their pain for the comfort of others. And in that wake, one truth became clearer than ever. You don't need to yell to make them hear you. You just have to mean it